Video 3.3. One of the most challenging decisions a company can confront is whether to diversify. The rewards and risks can be extraordinary. Success stories, you could think of General Electric, Disney, and 3M. But so do stories of such infamous and costly failures such as Quaker Oats' entry and exit from the juice business with Snapple, and RCA's foray into computers, carpets, and rental cars. What makes diversification such an unpredictable, high-stakes game? First, companies usually face the decision in an atmosphere not conducive to thoughtful deliberation. For example, an attractive company comes into play, and a competitor is interested in buying it. Or the board of directors urges expanding into a new market, and suddenly senior managers must go through mountains of data, rate of returns, market forecasts under intense pressure. And to complicate it, diversification as a corporate strategy goes in and out of vogue on a regular basis. So there's little conventional wisdom to guide managers as they make a move that could increase shareholder value or seriously damage it. But diversification doesn't need to be such a roll of the dice. Yes, it will always involve uncertainty, and all major business decisions do. And indeed, there's a wealth of good advice about how to approach diversification. But my research suggests that if managers consider the following 6 questions, they can push their thinking still further to reduce the gamble of diversification. Answering the questions will not lead to an easy go, no-go decision, but exercise can help managers assess the likelihood of success. When can our company do better than any of its competitors in the current market? Just as it is important to take stock of the pantry before going shopping, so is it crucial for a company to identify its unique and unassailable competitive strengths before attempting to apply them elsewhere. The first step then is to determine the exact nature of those strengths, which I refer to in general terms as strategic assets. How is such an assessment usually done? Incompletely is usually the case. So the problem is that most companies confuse identifying strategic assets with defining their business. And a business is usually defined by either product, customer function, or core competencies. So when faced with the decision to diversify, managers need to think about what their company does, not what their company does, but what you do better than your competitors. And we've done a lot of work in competitive analysis up to this point. So in one sense, pinpointing strategic assets in a market-driven approach to business definition, it forces a business to identify how it might add value to an acquired company in a new market with new services, or however they're going to diversify. So before diversifying, managers must think not about what their company does, but what it does better than its competitors. Producers. In the 1980s, Blue Circle decided to diversify on the basis of an unclear definition of its business. The company managers determined that they were going to diversify into products related to home building. So they expanded into real estate, bricks, waste management, gas stoves, bathtubs, lawnmowers. Their move into lawnmowers was based on the logic that you need a lawnmower for your garden, which after all is next to your house. It's not surprising that very few of their diversifications forays proved successful. So what strategic assets do you need in order to succeed in a new market? So once you've identified where you're going, you need to identify what you need to succeed in the new market. And if you have those assets, you have to have all the assets that you're going to need to move forward if you want it to be a success. So back in the 1970s, a number of oil companies broke into the mineral business, and they figured they could exploit their competencies in exploration, extraction, and the management of large-scale projects. 10 years later, they all dropped out of the game because in addition to the oil company's capabilities, The mineral business required low-cost extraction capabilities and access to deposits, which the oil companies lacked. Coca-Cola is a company that is very well known for its diversification and has a very good, intimate understanding of its consumers. And in the 1980s, it decided to make its way into the wine industry, and not a lot of people realize that. The company quickly learned that it did not have something that was critical, and that was knowledge of the wine business. Having 90% of what it took to succeed in the new industry was not enough for Coke. I mean, this is a company that knows how to bring beverages to the shelves. But because they didn't have the ability to make high quality wine, which is the most critical component of success in the wine industry, they didn't make it. So the biggest lesson when you're considering diversification is that you have to know how and when to keep moving forward and how and when to throw your hand in. If a company is only holding a pair of strategic assets in an industry where most players have a better hand, there's no point in putting money on the table unless you can catch up or leapfrog your competitors at their own game. So what if Coke had known in advance that it lacked an important asset in the winemaking business? Would it have abandoned its diversification plans? Not necessarily. So you need to then answer another pair of questions. So if you're missing a critical factor for success in that new market, can you purchase it, develop it, or make it unnecessary by changing the competitive rules of the industry? Can you do it at a reasonable cost? So the Sharp Corporation in the early 1950s decided to leverage its existing strengths in manufacturing and retailing of radios by moving first into TVs and then microwave ovens. They licensed the television technology from RCA, these are two very old brands, and acquired the microwave oven technology by working with Litton, who was the innovator in that technology. Similarly, Sharp diversified into the electronic calculator business in the 1960s by buying necessary technology from Rockwell. The Walt Disney Company, which is a brand that is still current and we all are familiar with, has diversified following a similar strategy. They expanded from its core animation business into theme parks, live entertainment, cruise lines, resorts, and planned residential communities, as well as TV broadcasting and retailing. They have had cross-promotional relationships with lots of brands, including McDonald's and Mattel. And they've worked closely with state governments, which gave expertise when it was time to expand into the theme park business. So the final option for companies lacking the right strategic assets to play in a new market is to rewrite that market's rule of competition. One case point is Canon. Canon manufactures cameras, and it wanted to diversify from cameras to photocopiers in the 60s. They boasted strong competencies in photographic technology and dealer management, but they had a ton of competition from Xerox, which dominated the high-speed copy machine market. So, targeting large businesses through its well-connected direct sales force, Xerox leased their machines to their customers rather than sold it. So, after studying the industry, Canon decided to play the game a little differently. They targeted small and mid-sized businesses as well as the consumer market. Then they sold their machines outright through a network of dealers rather than through a direct sales force. And they differentiated their products from those of Xerox by focusing on quality and price rather than speed. As a result, Canon emerged as the market leader within 20 years of entering the business. So it took them 20 years from the initial diversification to become the leader in that market. So diversification is a very long-term strategy. So not all companies have the skill, financial strength, and managerial foresight to do what Canon did over a 20-year period. But it's just an example of if a company is considering diversification without the required assets in hand, they have to be obtained in one way or the other. The next thing they consider is, will diversification break up strategic assets that need to be kept together? So if you have assets that need to be kept together, for example, so will diversification break up strategic assets that need to be kept together? So you have to look at what diversification is going to do to your existing company. So most managers tackle the decision to diversify by using financial analysis, but that's not necessarily sufficient. So if a company plans to break apart, recombine, and relocate its assets, it has to be prepared to create a new environment for them. For example, in the 1980s, SMH was in the business of selling expensive watches to wealthy individuals through jewelers and specialty distributors. Its strategic assets were patented on ultra-thin precision movement technology and a reputation for Swiss quality. That cluster, however, was inadequate for competing in the mass market, which required large-scale distribution, cutting-edge designs, and additional purchasing skills. To overcome that problem, SMH acquired design skills from scratch by establishing the Swatch Design Lab in Milan, which employs artists, designers, and architects from all over the world, and at the same time it developed the required purchasing skills in-house. To gain better distribution, they went into a joint venture with another company and combined assets and competence in precision movement technology. So the whole world knows how Swatch was successful as a product in the 80s and 90s and even still today. But what happened before it hit the market was more impressive. The company's managers knew what strategic assets were necessary, created, and bought the ones that were missing, and then they combined all of those strategic assets, creating a symbiotic, self-reinforcing organization. And the company's move into the mass market watch business stands as an unusual case of core competencies being recombined for success in a new market. So, as you're diversifying, you need to make a goal, and that goal will be to simply be a player in the new market, or do you want to be a winner? You can storm into a new market with all the required competencies, put together a perfect combination, and you can still fail to gain a foothold. You have to bring something unique to the table, especially if the industry is crowded. So a company's competitive advantage will be short-lived and diversification will fail. How can managers assess whether their company's strategic assets have a strong likelihood or catapulting it into being an industry leader? And you can do a 3-part acid test to help that. So managers should ask if the strategic assets they intend to introduce a new market are rare. For example, Laker Airways soared in the package vacation business from 1966 to 76 on the basis of low-cost, low-price strategy. But in the mid-1970s, when Laker Airways tried to diversify into transatlantic, cross-country scheduled airline business, it bumped into British Airways and the large US-based airlines as well. British Airways, for example, used its reservation system and skills in predicting the volume of passengers on flights to offer similar bargains. Laker Airways ended up going bankrupt in 1982. The second question managers should ask is, can the strategic asset be imitated? 3M, for example, continues to diversify profitably on the strength of confidence that it is very hard to copy. Despite numerous companies paying lip service to focus on those ideals, very few can build and sustain success in the way 3M has. Third, managers need to ask whether the strategic asset that they plan to export can be substituted. Even if competitors can't copy a strategic asset, they might be able to create something similar where duplication doesn't matter. Dell Computer was able to substitute IBM's dealers in Salesforce by selling directly to the consumer. First Direct Bank was able to substitute Barclays' extensive branch network in the British banking industry by reaching customers over the phone. In contrast, Pepsi and other soft drink makers cannot replicate or substitute Coca-Cola's strong brand name, hence the company's unassailable competitive edge. Of course, no company will intentionally diversify into an industry in which it will lose money, but managers considering a new market venture must decide how much money they want to make and how much money they're willing to risk.